prove to the establishment that the concentration camp technique, the reversion to the second dimension of fascism, the terrorist face, but to prove that this terrorism won't work on us, it won't stop our movement.
This is the BGF oath. Weusi Gaidi Jama, that means Black Guerilla Family. If I should break my stride or falter at my comrade's side, this oath shall kill me. If my words should prove untrue, should I betray the chosen few, this oath shall kill me. Should I submit to greed or lust, should I betray the people's trust, this oath shall kill me. Should I grow lax in discipline, in time of strife refuse my hand, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand, this oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the guerrillas of Black August, Weusi Gaidi Jama.
Greetings and salutations. It's your host, Gabe Morales, returning for another episode of Black Guerilla family members over the past 6 decades or so. So there's a few things I'd like to follow up on from my last video. Unfortunately, my movie maker only allows me to make videos approximately 24 minutes long. So, I also wanted to add that basically there have been 2 factions over the years. One is BEN, or Black Entrepreneurial Network, which was led by individuals such as L. Raider Browning Jr. and Doc Holliday. The original BGF was known as Campbell. And when George Jackson took over, it became known as the Ball and Chain. When Kenneth Fatigue Carter took over as Supreme Commander, the organization changed again, and he pushed a new philosophy of the new man, new woman. However, some disagreed with this movement. In 1986, CDC authorities discovered that BGF were using a new name, New African Revolutionary Nationalism, or NARN, which they believe was meant to throw authorities off on activities of the BGF. New members are expected to cite the BGF oath by memory, as well as other BGF documents, and they study military tactics and fighting skills. If they violated a rule, they could be given a minor violation of something like 1,000 push-ups or a writing assignment. However, serious infractions meant expulsion from the BGF and meant that they landed on the Dragon List, which is a hit list that BGF kept of their sworn enemies. As I stated before, during the late 1960s and early 70s in particular, the BGF had an alliance with the Nuestra Familia, and they would often communicate via their lawyers by legal mail with coded letters to each other. The BGF called the NF cousins, and the NF would call the BGF names such as Bobby G. Foster, which the initials stood for Black Guerilla Family. I have a letter in my book that shows an example of this coded communications. I had also mentioned that sometimes the Mexican Mafia can get along with the BGF. An example of this is when George Jackson escaped and all those officers were killed, as well as the 2 Aryan Brotherhood tear tenders, when Rock and Roll Lopez backed up the BGF. Most of the time, Mexican Mafia members who did this was because of more hate towards staff than love for the BGF. There's always exceptions, and one is Luis Bala Talamantes, who has remained a revolutionary aligned with the BGF all these years, and was also present on that bloody day. I should have also mentioned that several Mexican Mafia members signed off on the 2012 agreement to end hostilities at Pelican Bay, such as Arturo Tablas Castellanos, and he signed it with Sitawa Nantambu Jama Dewberry, who authorities identified as being a BGF member at the time. I think I forgot to mention in the opening video the scene where the video of the Black Guerilla family members being carried out was an attack by Mexican Mafia members Black Dan Varela and Mundo Mendoza, who were known as heavy hitters back in the day. In retaliation for that attack, the BGF attacked Daniel Spider Arriaga, Edward Seller Boy Gonzalez, and Guillermo Memo Garcia. On October 4, 1973, Mundo Mendoza stabbed BGF member Robert E. Williams in the chest on San Quentin's Adjustment Center yard. I remember being told by the old Folsom Guards when I started in 1987 that only a few years prior there was a bloody war between the Mexican Mafia associates known as camaradas and their allies, the Sureños, against the Black Guerrilla family, other black prison gangs, as well as groups like the Crips, Bloods, and 415. In just one incident, 11 shots were fired, killing one MA soldier and 6 inmates were stabbed in that incident. The prison immediately went on lockdown, but the gangs had no intention of stopping. In 1984, 108 inmates were stabbed, 6 died. In 1985, 216 were stabbed and 7 died. Finally, in 1986, a truce was called at Old Folsom between the two warring factions. I was told by the warden and a program administrator that Ernest Kilroy Roybal, Nico Velasquez, and Mo Farrell signed off on that agreement. And for that, I was told all 3 were stabbed. Mo Farrell was killed, as well as Nico Velasquez, and Kilroy soon dropped out. Even though that peace agreement was signed off, it didn't take long for them to start fighting again on the new side. I recall several instances during 1987 to 1993 where the blacks, the BGF and their supporters, and the Mexican Mafia and their supporters battled out on the yards. And it carried on years later, as seen here.
At Folsom State Prison today, northeast of Sacramento, mass violence broke out between 2 rival prison gangs. 1 man died and many others were injured. Prison guards fired live bullets to break up the riot in the exercise yard. Bob McKenzie reports.
Folsom Prison is divided into 3 facilities. This morning's riot broke out shortly after 9 o'clock among prisoners in the recreation yard of B facility. And the result was this. Injuries that strained ambulance services to the limit. 1 prisoner was killed, 13 more were wounded and rushed to Davis Medical Center. Of those men, 8 were stabbed by other prisoners. 5 were shot by prison guards.
And there seems like there was no end to this decades-long war when, in February of 2000, over 200 blacks, Chicano inmates, who were associates of the Mexican Mafia known as camaradas, or their supporters known as sureños, made a surprise attack on black inmates. One of the people said to be behind that bloody incident was longtime Mexican Mafia member Alfie Sosa. I show a clip of that incident in the opening BGF videos, where you see a wild melee take place on the yard. More than 24 rounds were fired by officers and 15 were wounded, including 1 Sureño who was killed. Using the old Vanguard name, a new faction started in 1978 at the Dual Vocational Institute that opposed revolutionary politics and severe methods that were being used by the BGF to purchase ranks. I remember one such member was Levi Johns, who I had at New Folsom Prison, who was well respected and was also a Crip member from LA. In fact, several Vanguards were hardcore Crips who felt the BGF had favored the Bloods, in particular the United Bloodline prison gang, and they declared war against the BGF at Folsom Prison in 1979. In 1981, the BGF moved against the Vanguard, killing 1 and injuring several others. Henry Sugar Bear Wilds and Michael Durrell were identified as being Vanguard leaders and attempted to reorganize. As I stated in the first video, in my younger days, I had some pretty radical beliefs, and I still believe in social justice. I have many black friends from my old neighborhood, such as my partner Nene and Ron Stallworth, the real black Klansman, along with my good friend Faye, who was a major administrator in the King County Sheriff's Office. Heck, my grandkids are half black. That's right, I teach them about Cinco de Mayo and we'll be there with them for June 19th. And we'll attend a family reunion while we're there on the mainland. So like I said, I'm very much in support of the African American community. I don't want anybody to take any of this information wrong. But I also speak out about black on black crime. A big part of that has been street and prison gang members, like the Black Guerrilla family. Now that I expanded on some of my main points in the intro video and in this video, now I'll get into some of the past members and associates of the BGF, starting with the A last names. So a lot of these guys were released from the security housing units from 2014 to 2016, as CDC had changed their validation policies. First off, I'm going to mention an individual named Ashanti Ali, who wrote a book called Spitfire, Makings of a Revolutionary. On the back cover, he states that sometimes the other cheek just won't suffice. I was not very impressed with this book. It seems to me that Ali was very angry when he wrote it and vents a lot towards the American criminal justice system, just as many BGF members have done in the past and still do today. I'll be one of the first ones to admit our American criminal justice system is not perfect, but it's the best we've come up with so far. And I've worked hard to improve it for many decades now. But individuals such as Ali seem to accept zero responsibility for their own actions. This is a theme that you hear again and again, how many of these guys were beaten in custody, but they often don't mention that was after they assaulted staff, and staff responded, sometimes with appropriate force and sometimes with excessive force, that they were tortured, usually referring to their solitary confinement due to disciplinary actions, often violent ones, that put them there, and that they were just a victim of the system, no matter how horrible their original crime was. That got them put in jail or prison. We'll cite many times how they're just a product of their environment. But here's the thing. I grew up in a public housing projects, many poor blacks, whites, and other races, and a lot of us came out of there okay. I believe that environment is part of the equation, but is definitely not the overriding factor. Much of that is due to making good choices or poor choices. And a lot of these guys just simply made poor choices. Very rarely do they accept any remorse for their victims. Ali also jokes in a sick and twisted way about how Elbridge Cleaver bragged to him about sodomizing and raping white women, as somehow that was a revolutionary act. Like I said, I'm not sure why Ashanti Ali cites Cleaver as his idol, since he cites more of his sexual predator acts than his thoughts on revolution. Like I said, not impressed with this book, so I threw it in the trash, as I found it contributed little to my understanding of true black liberation and the history of the BGF and Black Panthers. I'll mention Roderick Cash Adams from Long Beach, who had CDC number C as in Charles, 69659. I don't have a lot of information on him, but understand that he was a player into making money as his moniker implied. I show that he is currently not in custody. Individual named Akili, that means wisdom, intelligence, and sharpness of mind. I'm not sure of his identity, if anybody listening to this knows who I'm talking about, but he was mentioned by Bill Hankins in his book Alpha Guard, and he states that Akili was a BGF squad leader. Understand that Hankins, along with Special Services Agent Mike Pickett, interviewed Akili. Right away, when he saw them, commented that white people always ended up screwing him, and that he especially didn't like Agent Mike Pickett, as he reminded him of a honky who stabbed him several years before. According to Hankins, Akili eventually cooperated with them, and they gave him a lie detector test. Akili then made a deal and told them about several plots by the BGF to assassinate state politicians. Understand that Akili's wife was the sister of high-ranking BGF member Anderson Thurston, who was on parole at the time and very much active in BGF politics. You can read chapter 24 of Hankins' book, but he goes into great detail about how Akili helped them foil several assassination attempts in the early 1980s. There was Leonard, a.k.a. Yafeu, Dirty Red Alexander, who was out of Inglewood. I show that he entered CDC in March of 1976 and was housed at Pelican Bay in the 1990s through 2015, when, as I stated, CDC stopped following the BGF. I show that Alexander is currently housed at CTF Soledad. Like I said, if these guys act up, they can still put them in the shoe. They just can't do it solely because they're BGF members. There was Eugene Lateef Allen, who, on November 27, 1973, was accused, along with BGF shot caller Ernest Sujamud Graham, of killing CO Jerry Sanders at DVI. But later on, they had their convictions reversed. There's Samuel Bam Anderson, who I understand was out of Oakland and had CDC number D as in Delta 5765. I show that he was housed at Pelican Bay in 1998 when this picture was taken and remained there until around the time period the majority of the shoe kickouts from 2014 to 2016. I show that he was housed at Salinas Valley State Prison in 2015, but is currently not in custody, so hopefully doing well out in the streets. Shelton Lawan Adams was validated by CDC as being a KUMI/KANO, which stands for KUMI African Nation Organization member, and he was pegged as being a BGF associate. I'm citing his court case because I believe it's very interesting and very typical of what goes on inside prisons today. My understanding that Adams was a juvenile in 1994 when he and his co-defendants killed a Francisco Vega and Enrique Cuevas in Modesto. It is believed that this was a robbery that turned into a murder. Adams was only 16 years old at the time, went to court, was found guilty, and was made what is considered a California Youth Authority decline. In other words, my understanding is he was sent to the adult system. I show on October 20th, 1995, that Adams pled no contest to 2 counts of second-degree murder and admitted to being in possession of a firearm in the commission of a crime. He was then sentenced to 19 years to life, and he was assigned J numbers in John 94864. While in prison, Adams repeatedly violated prison rules. In other words, had numerous CDC 115s and 128s. Fighting with other inmates, possessing marijuana, possessing contraband, testing positive for drugs, and getting caught with a cell phone 6 different times. While he was in custody, he filed this lawsuit, which I will read excerpts of. I usually try to limit my personal comments when I discuss these guys, but there are occasions where I feel it's very important to give some context to the information that I'm sharing. Then Adams filed a lawsuit against the warden of Soledad, Craig Koenig, and commanding officer Martinez, as well as CDC agent Lopez. The case was based on racist violations of the Ralph Act, racist violation of the Bain Act, assault, battery, weaponizing of disease, meaning COVID-19, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and negligent supervision. The lawsuit read that in what only can be described as one of the most eye-popping racist attacks in recent civil rights history, on July 20th, 2020, the warden of a California correctional training facility in Soledad executed a raid dubbed Operation Achille, with the intent to injure, infect, terrorize, and provoke and humiliate a large number of sleeping African American inmates. It goes on to say that they engaged in a KKK-style assault, which sounds to me a little extreme. But that's often what these guys do. They use the most outrageous language, no matter how big or small of an act they felt slighted by. His lawsuit went on to say that the actions by CDC became a super spreader event, and claims that 2,700 subsequent cases of COVID-19 could be traceable to it, including 17 deaths at the prison. I'm not sure about that claim because COVID spreads very easily. You can get it from almost anywhere at any time. But according to Adams, he traces it all back to this particular event. As far as I know, he does not have the medical expertise to make the assessment that 2,700 subsequent cases of COVID were spread to this particular incident, as well as 17 deaths. You have to understand, with my 30 plus years of experience in corrections, graveyard usually comes on before midnight till early in the morning, and then day shift has the most senior officers. Most of the searches are done on swing shift. It has most of the young, motivated officers, and they usually have the most time to do so without upsetting regular day programs. Graveyard, in my experience, has a lot of old timers that just want to do their time till they retire, as well as a few youngsters who didn't have enough seniority to make day shift or swing shift. So if this search took place at 3 in the morning and they had enough time to name it Operation Achille, then it's my belief that they knew in advance that there was major contraband in the facility, and probably even knew which cells had the contraband via informants. And like I've said multiple times, this is not to say that corrections officials have never been negligent, because they have, and I've seen it. However, I also know that many times inmates make false accusations in the hopes that it'll cause staff and administration problems, or that they may get a large payout, and or somehow use that as leverage to increase their prison conditions. I understand that he was found unsuitable for parole in 2022, and I show that Shelton LaJuan Adams still resides at CTF Soledad. I'm not sure what happened in that lawsuit, but oftentimes CDC will pay these guys off. I've seen it many times where inmates will file legitimate and sometimes frivolous lawsuits, and the system would rather pay them off than take it to court. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It's just a lot easier and a lot cheaper, they view, in the long run. So, in my opinion, you often have a better chance of filing a lawsuit than you do hitting a big lotto ticket. But that's our criminal justice system, like I said. As imperfect as it is, it's the best we've come up with so far. I hope you enjoyed this episode and continue watching as we go through the alphabet of Black Guerilla family members over the past 6 decades or so. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.
time of strife, refuse my hand, this oath shall kill me. Should I fear any man or be slow to take a stand, this oath shall kill me. Long live the spirit of George Lester Jackson and the guerrillas of Black August, Guerilla Jama.